Sansa Stark had been living in King's Landing for long enough to learn the art of surviving among lions. Every day within the Red Keep, she wore a mask of docility and pleasantness. Her blue eyes lowered, her words measured and soft, her smile always gentle. Yet behind that facade, her mind was ever churning, a storm gathering above cold northern waters, and she was learning to wield her silence as skillfully as her mother had wielded wit. She had watched Cersei Lannister rule the capital with honeyed venom and steel, dispensing kindness with one hand and cruelty with the other. Sansa had seen her father's head on the spike. She had listened to her little brother's direwolf howl from the far side of the world in her dreams, longing for home, for Winterfell, for safety. But Winterfell was lost. Her family scattered, and she was a hostage in the den of her enemies. So Sansa endured. She learned. She survived. Cersei had been less cruel in recent months, having secured her grip upon the Iron Throne through her son Joffrey's ascension, and now with the Reach brought to heel by her new alliance with the Tyrells, she ruled from her golden seat with arrogant confidence. Sansa remained in the Red Keep, paraded as the pretty captive daughter of traitors, kept close but always at arm's length. Sansa had not been a threat in Cersei's eyes, not since Robb Stark's head was sent back to the north, and her mother's body cast into the river. But Sansa's threat was not in sword or strength, but in her quiet cunning. It was during the endless wedding feasts for Margaery Tyrell and King Joffrey that the seed of a plan took root. Sansa watched as Cersei held court, draped in crimson and gold, the emeralds at her throat gleaming, her laughter brittle as broken glass. The Queen Mother drank wine by the flagon, but never lost her composure. Servants rushed to and fro. All eyes were upon the king, the queen, the lords and ladies. Sansa, as ever, was invisible. Invisible, she discovered, was power. On the fourth day of feasting, when the halls of the Red Keep were thick with the cloying stench of roasted meats and the drone of Tyrell singers, Sansa wandered into the gardens with Lady Olenna. The Queen of Thorns spoke in whispers, weaving words like a tapestry. She bemoaned the cruelty of the Lannisters, the foolishness of Joffrey, the vanity of Cersei, and her bright eyes fixed on Sansa with a mixture of affection and calculation. "My dear," Lady Olenna murmured, "you remind me of myself at your age, too clever for your own good, and surrounded by fools." Sansa smiled faintly. "You are too kind, my lady. I am never kind. I am honest. Kindness is wasted in this city." The old woman patted Sansa's hand. "You must learn to use your wits if you want to survive. Even a little bird must have her talons sharp. Then see you." That night, Sansa lay awake, replaying Lady Olenna's words. She wondered, as she often did, if she could ever be brave enough, ruthless enough, to fight back. She pictured Cersei's smile, her lies, her poisonous words that had killed Sansa's father, that had tormented her every day since, and she realized she was ready. The poison came from Ser Dantos, the drunken fool knight, who had once been her only friend in King's Landing. He had grown desperate of late, worried for his own skin. He brought her a small vial, cloudy and blue, pressed into her palm as he staggered past her in the Godswood, reeking of sour wine. "For you, little bird, the kind that kills quick, but not so quick the maester will know what's been done. From the Alchemist's Guild it is, just a drop." He said it would cost her a favor someday. Sansa promised whatever he wished, though she knew even then that Ser Dantos would not live long enough to collect it. The next days passed in a haze. Sansa studied Cersei's habits, the cupbearers who brought her wine, the favored goblets, the afternoon gatherings when the Queen Mother grew bored of statecraft and retired to the solar with her ladies. Sansa slipped through the halls like a shadow, unremarked, always smiling. On the morning of the Queen Mother's name day, the Red Keep was alive with celebration. Lords and ladies thronged a great hall, and every corridor was bright with banners and the scent of fresh flowers. Sansa was summoned to attend Cersei's table, to pour her wine and flatter her with the other highborn ladies. Cersei reclined on a cushioned seat, draped in gold, her hair a shimmering halo. Her laughter rang out, clear and cruel, as she mocked a Tyrell cousin's ill-fitted gown. Sansa moved quietly among the guests, refilling goblets with sweet summer wine. Her hands did not tremble. She watched for the right moment, when Cersei's attention was elsewhere. when the ladies were deep in gossip, when no one cared to notice a little bird in blue silk. She uncorked the vial with her thumbnail, its contents swirling like mist. She let a single drop slip into Cersei's cup, dissolving instantly. Sansa poured the wine, topped it with honeyed essence as the queen liked, and set the goblet gently at Cersei's elbow. She did not look away as Cersei lifted it, sipped, and smiled. The queen mother's lips were stained red, her eyes sharp as ever. Sansa's own heart thudded in her chest, cold and heavy, as she curtsied and retreated to her place. The feast continued. Cersei drank deeply, laughing with Lady Merryweather, gossiping about Margaery's new gown, berating her brother Jaime with sly barbs. The hours passed. Sansa sat quiet as a mouse, her eyes fixed on her lap. It was only as dusk fell, when the shadows stretched long across the marble floor, that Cersei faltered. She reached for her goblet, but her hand shook. Her laughter grew hoarse, her voice strained. She blinked, fumbled, knocked her cup to the floor, spilling red wine across the flagstones. The ladies gasped. Jaime rose from his seat, his golden hand catching his sister's arm as she slumped against the table. Cersei's lips were blue, her breath ragged, her skin gone as pale as milk. She tried to speak, but her tongue was thick, her words slurred. Sansa watched, silent, as the Queen Mother's eyes met hers, wide and wild, full of terror and hatred. For a moment, it seemed that Cersei understood, that she saw through Sansa's mask to the cold, calculating heart beneath. Then Cersei collapsed. The room erupted in chaos. Jaime shouted for a maester. Lady Merryweather shrieked. The High Septon stumbled forward, praying for the Queen Mother's soul. Cersei writhed on the floor, clutching her throat, her golden hair tangled, her fingers clawing at the stones. Sansa did not move. She sat, composed, as chaos reigned. She thought of her mother and father, of Robb, of Winterfell burning. She thought of the cold wind off the wall, and the pack of wolves running through the snow. Cersei died as the bells tolled midnight. The city woke to mourning. Black banners were hung from the towers, and the lords and ladies of the court wept crocodile tears for their lost queen. The king, her son, Tommen, just a boy, was distraught, inconsolable, clutching Sir Pounce to his chest as he sobbed. The Tyrells stepped into the vacuum, whispering comfort, offering guidance. The small council scrambled, vying for power, as the Red Keep trembled with uncertainty. Sansa played her part. She wore black for mourning, spoke gentle words to Tommen, curtsied to Margaery, kept her eyes downcast and her tongue guarded. She watched the lords and ladies shift alliances, watched the power struggle unfold. She knew her own position was perilous. A Stark, once again orphaned, surrounded by enemies, but now without Cersei's protection. But something else was changing. Word spread that Cersei's death was not natural, that she had been poisoned by enemies unknown. The Alchemists' Guild swore their stores were untouched. The Master Cupbearers were interrogated, and several servants disappeared into the black cells. Varys, the spider, moved silently, his little birds whispering in the shadows. Sansa waited. She expected to be accused, to be questioned, to be thrown into the dungeons and tortured until she confessed. But no one suspected the little bird. Sansa's innocence was armor, her suffering, a shield. Lady Olenna paid her a visit, cloaked in mourning black, her cane tapping sharply against the flagstones. "Well, child," she said, her eyes glittering, "the city is in uproar. A queen dead, a king bereft. Power is for the taking, for those bold enough to seize it." Sansa looked at her, steady and calm. "I do not want power, my lady. I want only peace." Lady Olenna smiled, a wolf smile. "Peace is won, not given." In the days that followed, the game grew deadlier. The Lannisters, shorn of their matriarch, flailed. Jaime withdrew into himself, haunted and lost. Kevan Lannister tried to hold the family together, but Tywin's death and Cersei's now had broken their strength. The Tyrells moved swiftly. Margaery comforted Tommen, whispered in his ear, soothed his nightmares. Within a fortnight, the boy king was betrothed to her, and the Tyrells began to dominate the small council. Sansa, the orphaned wolf, was ignored, left to her embroidery and prayers. Yet Varys watched her, and Petyr Baelish smiled at her in the corridors. A serpent smile. Petyr approached her one evening as she gazed out across the city from a high balcony, the wind tangling her hair. "My dear Sansa," he murmured, "you are playing a dangerous game." Sansa did not flinch. "I am not playing at all, my lord." He laughed softly. "You will survive. Of that, I have no doubt." But Sansa did not trust Littlefinger, nor Varys, nor any of the men who ruled the court from the shadows. She kept to herself, watched, listened. She grieved, but not for Cersei. For her family, for the North, for the life she had lost. The weeks passed. Margaery was crowned queen, Tommen's hand in hers. The city cheered, banners flew. Sansa stood at the edge of the throne room, watching as power changed hands, as alliances shifted like sand. One night, a raven came from the Vale. Her Aunt Lysa was dead, the message said. And Petyr Baelish was Lord Protector. He wished for Sansa to come to him, for safety, for family. She considered, but she did not go. She had learned too much to trust any man's promises. As summer faded, Sansa began to gather allies of her own. A scullery maid who had seen too much, a stable boy whose father had died at Harrenhal, a septa who still remembered her mother's kindness. She whispered to them in the kitchens, in the stables, in the quiet corners of the Godswood. She listened to their stories, their grievances, their dreams. She became, in her own way, a queen. One morning, as the first snows dusted the rooftops of the city, Sansa knelt in the sept, lighting candles for her family. Lady Olenna joined her, her cane tapping softly. "Do you regret it, child?" Olenna asked. Sansa did not look up. "No. I regret only that it took me so long." The old woman chuckled. "You are stronger than you know. Be careful whom you trust. The game is never truly over." Men know. As the snows deepened and winter crept into King's Landing, Sansa Stark stood at her window and watched the city below. A city mourning its lost queen, ruled by strangers and usurpers, trembling beneath the shadow of winter. But the wolf had learned to survive among lions. She waited, and she watched, and she was ready. Ka. The bells of King's Landing tolled for Cersei for 7 days and 7 nights, their somber clamor rolling over rooftops and through the alleys like the cry of a wounded beast. In the wake of her death, the capital trembled, the delicate lattice of intrigue and alliances fraying at the edges. Every noble house in the city feared the hand behind the queen's sudden passing, yet none could name it. Some whispered of the Dornish, muttering about vengeful sandsnakes. Others saw the Tyrell's hand in it, citing Margaery's swift ascent. But as the days passed, suspicion turned to dread and dread to silence. Sansa Stark was neither accused nor interrogated. She kept her head bowed, her face a flawless mask of sorrow, moving quietly through the corridors of the Red Keep as a ghost among the living. Yet the air in the castle had changed. Sansa felt it in every breath, every glance, the predatory hunger beneath the surface. Lady Olenna, now rarely seen outside her solar, dispatched her spies to the corners of the city, knitting a web of secrets. Petyr Baelish, never far from the scent of chaos, circled the halls, his eyes cold and knowing. And Varys, who glided through the shadows as only a true spider could, was suddenly everywhere and nowhere, his little birds flocking to him with new fervor. One evening, Sansa found herself alone in the Godswood. The weirwood tree, a rare thing so far south, stood silent as always, its pale bark stained with crimson, its leaves whispering in the chill. She pressed her palm to the trunk and closed her eyes, longing for the north, for the simplicity of her father's words and the strength of her mother's embrace. She whispered a prayer, half to the old gods, half to her dead. "I am still here," she said softly. "I am still Stark." A footstep behind her drew her attention. Sansa turned, her hands dropping from the tree, and met the eyes of Lord Varys. He bowed, his manner courteous and soft. "Your Grace," he began, then corrected himself. "My lady, forgive the intrusion." Sansa summoned a smile. "It is no intrusion, Lord Varys. I was only remembering." Varys stepped closer, hands folded in his voluminous sleeves. King's Landing has little patience for remembrance. It is a city forever looking forward to the next feast, the next war, the next betrayal. His voice was gentle. "I hope you have found a measure of peace, now that Queen Cersei is at rest." The words hung between them, sharp as a blade. Sansa's heart stilled, then beat on. "I pray for her soul," she replied, "and for Tommen's." "His young heart is heavy," Varys murmured, his gaze unwavering. "He misses his mother greatly. He looks for guidance you might offer." She considered the offer within the words, the invitation wrapped in silk. "I am not his family," Sansa said, and Varys only smiled, as if she had confirmed some private suspicion. In times such as these, family can be made. Friends can be forged anew. Varys dipped his head, his voice lowering. "It is a dangerous time for orphans, my lady, but also a time of opportunity. The right word, spoken to the right ear, can shape kingdoms." He left her with that, gliding away through the trees, and Sansa listened to the wind in the leaves, hearing her mother's voice somewhere in the susurrus. When she returned to her chambers, Sansa found a folded letter on her pillow. The seal was unbroken, but she knew at once it was from Petyr Baelish. She read it by candlelight, the words written in a hand she had come to know too well. "Sansa, my sweetling, I hope you know that chaos is but a ladder. The city will devour itself soon, unless a clever hand guides it. There is a place for you in the Vale, if you wish it. Safe and warm, as my daughter and my queen. The winds grow cold in the north, and the wolves there are not so kind as those in stories. Let me know your answer soon. Your protector, always Petyr." Sansa's hand trembled as she read. She burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the parchment curl and blacken. She would not be Petyr's pawn. Never again. It was not long before the first accusations began to fly. Small at first. Servants vanished. Then a kitchen girl found dead. Then whispers of a plot in the cellars beneath the Great Sept. Sansa's name was never spoken aloud, but she saw suspicion flicker in the eyes of the lords as she walked the halls. Margaery Tyrell, now queen, summoned Sansa to her solar under the guise of comfort. "My poor sweet Sansa," Margaery murmured, her eyes brilliant in the afternoon light. "You must be so frightened. With all this talk of poisoners and traitors, you must know I would protect you if I could." Sansa held her gaze, searching for the steel beneath the flowers. "Thank you, Your Grace. You have always been kind to me." Margaery smiled, but her hand tightened on the armrest. "I do what I can, but King's Landing is not a place for innocence. I know how the game is played, Sansa. I only hope you do as well." She leaned closer, voice low. "You were wise to stay quiet after Joffrey's death, and after Cersei's. Many eyes are upon you. I would not want you to be caught in a storm not of your making." "Bane?" Sansa understood the warning. The queen had no proof, but she saw the world clearly, as Lady Olenna did. Sansa curtsied, withdrew, and added another name to the list of those who might become allies or enemies. That night, she slipped from her chambers and moved through the corridors with purpose. The castle was restless, guards doubled, eyes everywhere. But Sansa had learned the servants' routes, the hidden doors. She reached the kitchen, where the scullery maid, Bessa, was waiting with a scrap of parchment. "It's from the docks, m'lady," Bessa whispered, wringing her hands. "Said it was urgent." Sansa took the note and read it by the firelight. There was to be a shipment, a cask from Dorne. Wine, strong and sweet, marked with a black sun. The sigil was one she recognized. Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, who had come to the city for vengeance and left behind only blood. Sansa's mind raced. Someone was smuggling poison into the city. Or perhaps more than poison. Perhaps arms. She folded the note and pressed a coin into Bessa's palm. Thank you. Tell no one. She returned to her rooms, thinking. The Tyrells, the Martells, the Lannisters, each moved pieces on the board. Each thought themselves the master of the game. But none saw her. Not truly. She was still the little bird. Still invisible. But she was learning to fly. The next morning, Tommen summoned her. The boy king sat atop the iron throne, his feet barely reaching the floor, his eyes rimmed red. Sir Kevan stood at his side, stern and silent. Sansa, Tommen said, his voice trembling. I miss my mother. She knelt before him, careful and composed. She loved you dearly, your grace. Tommen's lip quivered. They say she was murdered. They say the gods will punish us all. Sir Kevan's gaze was hard as flint. The queen's death was unnatural. We will find those responsible. You were close to her, Lady Sansa. Did she say anything unusual before she died? Sansa kept her eyes lowered. Only that she loved Tommen. She spoke of her father, Lord Tywin. I think of the Tyrells. Kevan's mouth twitched. He exchanged a look with Tommen, who nodded, eyes wide. Thank you, Lady Sansa, Kevan said at last. You may go. She rose, curtsied, and departed. She could feel his eyes on her back. As the days bled into weeks, King's Landing became a city under siege. The Watch doubled patrols, and the Gold Cloak scoured Flea Bottom, searching for any hint of conspiracy. Servants were questioned, merchants hanged, a lordling from the Westerlands executed for crimes he did not commit. Fear ruled the streets. Yet amid the terror, Sansa's circle grew. The stable boy, Olivar, whispered of riders coming and going by night, of northern men seen near the river gate. The Septa brought news from the Sept, prayers for the dead, and for the living, and for the return of the Stark wolves. Sansa listened, gathered every scrap of knowledge, and waited. One dawn, as the sky turned pale and cold, a raven came from the north. Its wings were ragged, its message brief. Winterfell stands. The snow falls. The pack survives. Come home. There was no signature, but Sansa knew the hand. Dawn Dadae. She pressed the letter to her lips, feeling the hope bloom in her chest, fierce and sudden. She knew now what she must do. Petyr Baelish sought her out that evening, as she stood by the window, watching the city's lights flicker in the distance. Have you thought on my offer? He asked, his voice low and coaxing. The Vale is safe. I can take you from this city. You need only say the word. Sansa turned to him, her gaze steady. And what would I be in the Vale? Your wife, your pawn? He smiled, sly and secret. You would be my partner. Together we could rule. I have ruled before, she replied, in my own way. He stepped closer, hand reaching for hers. Let me help you, Sansa. You cannot do this alone. Ben? She drew her hand back, cold and resolute. I will never be yours, Petyr. His smile faded, replaced by something harder, darker. You have no friends in this city. Sansa met his gaze. I do not need friends. I need only the truth. She left him standing in the cold, the door closing softly behind her. The next day, Sansa visited the Sept, kneeling before the statues of the Seven. She lit candles for her mother, for her father, for her brothers and sisters scattered to the winds. As she prayed, Lady Olenna's voice interrupted her thoughts. You are brave, child. Foolish, but brave. Sansa looked up. The Queen of Thorns lowered herself onto the bench beside her, cane tapping softly. I have lost much, Sansa said. We all have. Lady Olenna studied her. If you wish to leave this city, now is the time. I have a ship bound for Old Town. A place can be found for you among the Tyrell household. Sansa shook her head. My place is in the north. My brother has sent for me. Olenna's eyes narrowed. Are you certain the North will welcome you? I am a Stark of Winterfell, Sansa replied, her voice iron. It is my home. The old woman smiled, lips thin and sharp. Then go, child. But remember, the game is never over. If you play, play to win. That evening, Sansa donned a plain cloak and slipped from her chambers, accompanied by Oliver and Bessa Dudai. They moved through the winding streets, past the guards, through secret doors, and out into the city. At the docks, the black-sunned cask awaited. Oliver handed it to Sansa. Inside, hidden among the bottles of Dornish wine, was a dagger and a ring bearing the sigil of House Stark, proof, if she needed it, that her family called her home. She boarded a ship bound for White Harbor. As the moon rose above the city, she looked back only once, seeing the Red Keep bathed in golden light, its towers sharp against the night sky. As the ship sailed north, Sansa thought of Cersei's death, of the chaos left in her wake. She thought of Lady Olenna, of Margaery, of Petyr, of Varys. Each had their own game, their own secrets. But Sansa had survived them all. She reached White Harbor in winter's grip, the city cloaked in snow and the air sharp as a blade. Lord Wyman Manderley welcomed her, his hospitality genuine, his loyalty to House Stark unwavering. From there, Sansa traveled north, her heart pounding with every mile, every glimpse of the frozen rivers and dark pines. When she reached Winterfell, it was dusk, the sky heavy with clouds, the walls rising from the snow like the bones of a giant. The gates opened, and Jon stood waiting, his face as solemn and grave as ever, but his eyes shining with relief. "Sansa," he said, his voice rough. "You're home." She embraced him, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to weep. They walked the halls of Winterfell together, sharing stories of loss and survival. Sansa spoke of the South, of the Red Keep, of the poison in the wine. Jon listened, silent and fierce. And when she finished, he took her hand. "We are Starks," he said. "We survive. We endure." Winter fell hard that year, snow piling high against the walls, the wind howling through the towers. Sansa grew stronger with every day, her spirit hardening like steel in the cold. She oversaw the kitchens, the storerooms, the ravens. She learned from Jon, from the men of the Night's Watch, from the wildlings who had come to seek refuge within Winterfell's walls. Word came from the south that King's Landing had turned on itself. Margaery Tyrell had vanished, presumed dead. Petyr Baelish was slain in the chaos, his throat cut by his own men. Tommen, lost and alone, had leapt from the highest window of the Red Keep, and the Iron Throne now stood empty. Varys disappeared into legend. The lords quarreled. The realm bled. But in the north, the pack survived. Sansa, Lady of Winterfell, rebuilt her home with patient hands, drawing strength from the land, from the people who called her their own. She walked the Godswood every day, feeling the ancient magic in the trees, the echo of her ancestors in the snow. She was no longer a little bird. She was the wolf who had learned to wear the feathers, and now she wore her true self with pride. Winter raged beyond the walls, but within, there was warmth and hope and the promise of a new beginning. And somewhere far away, in the heart of King's Landing, the ghosts of the past lingered. The poison had run its course, the game had claimed its queen, but the song of ice and fire endured. Neve, the wolves of Winterfell thrived in the cold, and Sansa Stark was one of them now. The stone walls that had once seemed so forbidding as a girl were her sanctuary. The endless gray sky above her was freedom, not a cage. She moved through the castle with steady steps, her breath ghosting in the frozen air, her thoughts no longer tangled with fear but sharpened with purpose. Each morning brought new duties: stock-taking, ordering, healing, judging disputes, tending to ravens, and managing the stores that would sustain them through the lengthening winter. Where once she would have flinched at the sound of a raised voice, Sansa now listened, considered, and made decisions that mattered. She felt the North gather itself around her, and with every passing week, she became not only the Lady of Winterfell, but its heartbeat. Jon Snow was at her side, and often he would watch her with a small secret smile. One she recognized as approval, pride, and a deep, weary trust. He let her take the burden of some cares from his shoulders, the way only kin could, and the others, old Maester Wolkan, Lyanna Mormont, Sir Davos Seaworth, soon learned to seek her guidance as often as Jon's. In the quiet of Winterfell, away from the eyes and venom of King's Landing, Sansa found herself, piece by piece. The world beyond their gates was changing, and the North felt it in the marrow of its bones. Letters arrived by Raven, inked with tidings of chaos. The Riverlands ablaze with smallfolk rebellion, the Lannisters driven from the west by their own bannermen, the Vale locked in civil war, and the South in turmoil, as the Golden Company made landfall to claim the Iron Throne in the name of a Targaryen prince. The Baratheon bastards had risen up in Storm's End, flying a black stag on yellow for a king who would not kneel to any queen. Sansa read these missives at the high table, her face calm even as the news set the hall murmuring. Each word reminded her of the games played in the South, of the poison that had flowed as surely as wine, of the death of Cersei Lannister, and the collapse of everything she'd ruled. It was as if her single drop of poison had unstitched a tapestry, and now the threads were flying loose in every wind. But Winterfell stood. The snow deepened, the walls held, the hearths burned bright. One evening, as snow drifted against the windows and the great hall rang with laughter and song, a rider arrived from the east, bearing the black and red of House Targaryen. He was a small, slender man with a scholar's stoop, and the careful manner of one unused to the cold. "I bring word from Queen Daenerys Stormborn," he said, bowing low before Jon and Sansa. "She is in White Harbor with her armies, and seeks parley with the king in the north." The name rippled through the hall, half with awe, half with dread. Jon's eyes met Sansa's across the firelight. She saw the worry and the old uncertainty there, a bastard's caution, a wolf's protectiveness. Sansa gave him the smallest of nods. "We will treat with the Dragon Queen," Jon said, his voice carrying across the tables. "She is our guest, as long as she comes in peace." Preparations were made. Winterfell bustled like a beehive, servants scurrying, fresh rushes laid, tapestries rehung, food and ale and furs prepared. Sansa oversaw it all, calm and unyielding, her eyes on the details. No cup would go unwashed, no food untasted. She would not see her home poisoned by another queen's game. Daenerys arrived 3 days later, white wolves running beside her procession, unsullied in silver and gray armor, Dothraki in furs, and a dragon soaring high above the towers. The snow hissed against its scales as it circled, and the people of Winterfell gaped in wonder and terror. Daenerys herself rode at the head, cloaked in black and crimson, silver hair loose around her face. She was beautiful, Sansa admitted, but there was something fierce in her gaze, something that burned like the heart of a fire. Jon greeted her in the courtyard, and Sansa stood beside him, every inch the Lady of Winterfell. They spoke their courtesies before the assembled North, a moment for all to witness, and then retreated to the solar to speak in private. "My lords, my lady," Daenerys began, her voice rich with command, "I come seeking allies. The world to the south has torn itself apart. The Iron Throne is mine by right, and the Golden Company marches against me. But the true war is not for crowns. It is for survival. The Night King is broken, but the long night may yet return. I will not see Westeros fall into shadow and ash." "And now," she looked to Jon, then to Sansa, "I know you have no reason to trust the South. I have heard what happened here, what you have endured, but I am not Cersei Lannister." "No," Sansa said softly, "you are not." Jon spoke first of loyalty and oaths, of what the North would and would not give. But Sansa spoke too, of what it would mean to trust again. What it would take to bind North and South without chains or fear. "My Lady Queen," Sansa said, "the North remembers. We remember betrayal, and we remember justice. We will not kneel to those who would rule with fire or fear." But if you would be a friend to Winterfell, you will find us steadfast. Now." Daenerys listened, her eyes flicking to Jon, then back to Sansa. "Then let us begin as friends. Let us eat, drink, and talk of the future, not the past." They did. That night, the high table was filled with both Northmen and the Queen's companions. Tyrion Lannister, gray and tired but quick of wit. Missandei of Neath, gentle and wise. Ser Jorah Mormont, returned at last to his kin, though wary as a hound. Sansa found herself talking to Tyrion, recalling the strange brief comfort of their marriage, the odd kinship that had grown in the darkness of King's Landing. "You look well, Lady Stark," Tyrion said, raising his cup. "Winter agrees with you. And you have not changed at all," Sansa replied, a ghost of a smile crossing her lips. "Still, the cleverest man in the room, and still here to see history made." Tyrion's expression darkened. "History is often written in blood, Sansa. Let us hope it need not be so this time." The dragon roared overhead, its shadow flickering across the hall. Sansa felt no fear. If she could face Cersei Lannister, she could face a dragon. After the feast, Jon and Daenerys conferred late into the night, and Sansa walked the battlements alone, the snow swirling around her. She thought of her parents, of her siblings lost and found. She thought of Arya, somewhere out in the wilds with her wolf's heart and her quiet, deadly purpose. She thought of Bran, changed and distant, his eyes always seeing something just beyond her understanding. And she thought of Cersei, dead in the south, and wondered if her ghost lingered in the halls of the Red Keep, whispering of vengeance, or if she had vanished entirely, lost in the darkness she had sown. The days passed, and Daenerys remained in Winterfell. Her army encamped on the frozen fields, her dragon perched on the highest tower. She and Sansa circled each other with wary respect. Two queens in all but name. Two survivors who knew what it was to lose everything and claw it back. Sansa saw the steel in Daenerys, saw her weariness and her wounds, and perhaps glimpsed a kindred soul. But trust did not come easy. When Daenerys pressed Jon to bend the knee, Sansa's temper flared. "The North is free," Sansa said. "We have bled for it, died for it. We will not give it up." Daenerys' eyes burned. "And what would you do if the dead returned, if the armies of men fell once more? Stand alone and die proud, or stand with me and live?" "Living is not always enough," Sansa said, her voice steady. "We must live as ourselves, not as someone else subjects." The argument ended in silence, the air between them crackling. Yet when the day was done, Sansa found herself drawn to Daenerys' side again and again, not out of duty, but curiosity. What did this queen want? What did she fear? What would she give for the peace of the realm? In the months that followed, Sansa helped Jon and Daenerys broker peace with the Northern Lords, taught the Unsullied the ways of winter, found work for the Dothraki among the farms and smithies. She rebuilt what could be rebuilt and mourned what could not. A new message arrived from King's Landing. The city was lost to famine and riot, the Iron Throne melted by dragonfire, and no ruler now claimed the city save those bold or mad enough to seize it for a night. Tyrion, hearing the news, called a council of the remaining great houses. The lords and ladies gathered in Winterfell, huddled against the cold, and Sansa sat at Jon's side as they debated the fate of the realm. The discussion raged. Some called for Daenerys to rule all, others for independence, others for a council to choose a king as the free cities did. Sansa listened, then rose and spoke her truth. "The North will remain free, but we will be your friends. We will stand against any enemy, so long as you treat us as equals, not subjects." Others followed, Yara Greyjoy demanding the Iron Islands' freedom, Edmure Tully blustering for the Riverlands. Daenerys, seeing her dreams of a united realm dissolve, finally relented. "So be it," she said, her voice cold as the snow. "Let each kingdom rule itself, and let us be bound by choice, not by chains." Peace, fragile as spun glass, settled over the hall. After the council, Sansa found Daenerys in the Godswood, her cloak dusted with snow. "You killed Cersei," Daenerys said. Not a question, but a simple statement. Sansa met her gaze, the old fear gone. Yes. Why? Daenerys' eyes searched hers, not for judgment, but for understanding. Because I could not let her destroy any more lives, Sansa said. She would have killed me, or Jon, or the North. It was her, or us. Daenerys nodded, silent for a long time. You did what you had to. I have done worse. Sansa almost smiled. We all have. But the realm needs women who can make hard choices. Not out of cruelty, but for the future. Daenerys studied her, then offered a hand. Sansa took it, the past sealed between them like a pact. In the years that followed, Sansa ruled the North with wisdom and resolve. She rebuilt the shattered keeps, fed the hungry, and settled the land for the next generation. The North was proud and whole again, its people loyal not out of fear, but love. Jon rode south with Daenerys to bring peace to the shattered realm, but always returned to Winterfell, where Sansa welcomed him home. Arya sent ravens from the far corners of the world, stories of adventure and wild places. Bran came and went as he pleased, silent and strange. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, Sansa remembered Cersei's eyes as the poison took hold. Fear and hatred mingling. The certainty of defeat. She did not regret her choice. The world was made new from the ashes of old queens and old lies. One winter, deep and long, a young girl was born to Sansa. A child with auburn hair and eyes of ice. Sansa named her Lyanna, after her father's sister. She taught her daughter to read, to ride, to lead, and never to flinch from the truth. And so the line of Stark endured. The snow fell, and the wolves ran, and in the heart of the North, the memory of a single drop of poison echoed in every choice Sansa made. A reminder that peace could only be won by those with the courage to risk everything for it. Winter came and went, and in time, the North was at peace. Sansa Stark, the little bird, had become the wolf. Unyielding, wise and fierce, the queen in the North, who had turned the world on its head and made it anew. Me. Spring found Winterfell softened by the thaw. The rivers swelled with the meltwater, and the meadows outside the walls sparkled with wildflowers, a fleeting riot of color beneath the lingering gray. Ravens brought news of harvests in the Reach. Ships from Old Town to White Harbor, marriages in the Vale, and, once, word from Dorne, where the sand and sun endured unchanged. Sansa Stark walked the battlements with her daughter, Lyanna, whose curiosity was boundless, and whose courage, Sansa feared and treasured in equal measure, was like her namesake's. She watched the girl peer down from the parapet, eyes full of the vastness of the world and the unknowable reach of possibility. Sansa felt the pulse of all her ancestors, the ancient Starks who had weathered winters long before the Iron Throne existed. She saw in her daughter's face the hope and terror that came from ruling, knowing that peace was never permanent, that everything built could be undone in a single generation by cruelty, greed, or a mistake as small as a careless word or an unguarded heart. Inside the keep, the days passed in a rhythm that Sansa found comforting. She held court in the Great Hall, listening to farmers, craftsmen, and small folk with patience. She ruled with steady hands, sometimes strict but never capricious. The small folk, once cowed by the memory of Boltons and Lannisters, now spoke her name with respect. She wrote often to Jon, who remained in King's Landing for longer and longer stretches. Daenerys had brought a harsh sort of peace to the realm, not through conquest but through exhaustion. She allowed the North its independence, the Iron Islands their freedom, Dorne their pride. The Targaryen banners hung above the melted ruins of the Iron Throne, a reminder that the old world had been burned away. Jon served as Daenerys' hand, his word trusted, his loyalty unbreakable. Sansa knew the distance was as much necessity as choice. The North would never kneel again, and Jon belonged in both worlds, half wolf and half dragon. Sansa's own world was bounded by the walls of Winterfell and the wild lands beyond. Bran came and went as he pleased, slipping through the world with the silent knowledge of a greenseer. Arya sent letters from across the sea, tales of lost cities and forgotten gods. Even Rickon's name was spoken now, not as a wound, but as a memory kept alive in stories. Sansa kept her family close, even as time and distance scattered them. One day, as she sat with Maester Wolkan reviewing tallies of stores and crop yields, a raven arrived bearing a crimson ribbon, the seal broken and resealed a dozen times on the long journey north. The letter inside was brief, and every word carved a furrow of worry across her brow. A council was called in King's Landing. Every lord and lady, every sworn sword and wise maester who held influence in the fractured kingdoms was summoned. There were rumors of ships landing on the Stormlands coast, banners flying the Golden Lion once more. Whispers spoke of Lannister gold finding its way into the hands of hedge knights, of mercenaries mustered in the Westerlands, of a claimant to the throne gathering power in the chaos. Sansa stood by the hearth, the message trembling in her hand. Lyanna sat at her feet, playing with a carved direwolf, unaware of the shadow that crossed her mother's face. "What is it, Mama?" Lyanna asked, her voice bright. Sansa knelt, brushing a lock of auburn hair from the girl's forehead. "It's news from King's Landing. I may have to go south for a time, to help keep the peace." Lyanna frowned. "You said we were safe now." Sansa smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "We are. But sometimes peace needs tending, like a garden. If we do not watch the weeds, they grow." And an hour. That evening, Sansa summoned her council: Sir Davos, Lyanna Mormont, Lord Manderley, Old Maester Wolkan, and a handful of loyal bannermen. She read the letter aloud, her voice calm. "We will send a force south with you," Lord Manderley declared, his jowls quivering with resolve. "The Lannisters will not catch the North unawares again." "No," Sansa replied. "If I march with swords, it will be taken as a threat. I will go as I am, with only a handful of sworn swords, as a queen among equals. The North stands for peace, not war." "And show." Sir Davos nodded approval, but Lyanna Mormont scowled. "If you die, who will rule?" Sansa regarded the girl, her heart tightening. "If I do not go, many may die. The world is changing, Lyanna. We cannot hide behind our walls forever." In the days before her departure, Sansa walked the halls, speaking to each of her people. She left Lyanna in the care of Maester Wolkan and Sir Davos, trusting them as she would have trusted her mother. She knelt in the godswood and prayed for wisdom, her hands pressed against the ancient face of the weirwood. She thought of her own mother, kneeling in this same grove, and felt the presence of the old gods, silent but steady. On the morning she departed, the snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, muting the world. Lyanna hugged her fiercely. Sansa pressed a kiss to her daughter's brow and whispered, "Be strong. Be brave. Remember who you are." With a handful of trusted guards, Sansa rode south. The journey was cold, but the land was alive with the promise of spring. Villages reawakened, the small folk stirring from their long slumber. Fields sown and hopes reborn. Along the road, Sansa heard their stories of hunger and hardship, of petty lords and bandits, but also of gratitude for the peace that had lasted, however fragile. She gave what help she could, always remembering her mother's lessons. A true ruler serves, not just commands. They reached King's Landing as the first green leaves unfurled along the King's Road. The city had changed since her last visit, cleaner, quieter, the brothels and slums less crowded, the markets full again. Dragons had not returned, but the memory of their fire was everywhere. The great Septi was a ruin, yet the bells were being restored, a sign of new faith rising from old ashes. The council convened in the throne room, now a great hall open to all who had cause to speak. Daenerys presided, flanked by Jon and Tyrion. Lords and ladies crowded the benches: Tarlys, Tullys, Redwynes, Baratheons, Greyjoys. Sansa walked in alone, her cloak trimmed in direwolf fur, and every eye turned. She felt their gaze, some admiring, some wary, a few openly hostile. The North's independence had inspired others, and not all wished to see a Stark's example unchallenged. Daenerys greeted her with a nod, regal and reserved. Jon's face betrayed relief, but also concern. Tyrion's smile was small and knowing. "Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell," Daenerys intoned. "The council is honored by your presence." Sansa bowed her head, her voice clear. "The North stands for peace, Your Grace, and for the good of the realm." The debates began, each house claiming their grievances, each vying for more power, less oversight, more coin. It was as if the old world were being restitched with new thread, every seam a potential tear. Rumors swirled. The Lannister heir, a youth named Martin, had escaped the sack of Casterly Rock and grown up in exile, gathering support in Essos. He claimed his right to the lion's share of the Westerlands and the throne itself. Letters from the free cities bore his seal, and stories of a golden-haired prince spread like wildfire. Sansa listened, weighing every word. She remembered how easily stories could be twisted, how quickly loyalty turned to treachery. But she also saw hope. Young lords and ladies who wanted something different, who remembered the cost of war and the taste of peace. On the second night, Jon found her alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The air was warm, and the lights of the city flickered like 1,000 candles. "You haven't changed," he said quietly, "but everything else has." Sansa smiled. "You have changed, Jon. You belong here now more than I ever did." He shook his head. "Winterfell is still my home." She laid a hand on his arm. "Home is where you're needed most. I'm not afraid for myself. I'm afraid for the future. I've seen how easily peace can break. I know how much it costs." Jon looked away, troubled. Daenerys means well, but this council, it's fragile. If the wrong person makes the wrong move. "It's always like that," Sansa said. "It always will be. We just have to make sure we're not the ones who let it break." A servant brought word that the council was resuming. Sansa returned to the hall, her mind racing. She spoke little, but listened much, weighing alliances, measuring ambition. She saw that the Baratheon Lord Gendry was both eager and honest, that Yara Greyjoy watched everyone with a hawk's suspicion, that Lady Tala Tarly's quiet counsel carried more weight than her father's bluster. When the time came to address the threat from the west, Sansa stood. "I have seen what happens when we let old wounds fester. The North remembers, yes, but we also forgive when there is true repentance. The West was once ruled by a house that brought pain to many. But not every lion is a monster. The sins of the parents are not always the sins of the children." A silence fell. Sansa went on. "If this Martin Lannister wishes to claim his birthright, let him come and speak for himself. Let him be judged, not by gold, but by his word and his actions. We cannot punish a child for the crimes of a queen." "Then durst thou?" Murmurs spread through the council. Sansa saw Tyrion nod, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. The day stretched into weeks, negotiations and arguments rising and falling with the tides. Daenerys struggled to maintain her authority, ruling by consensus rather than decree. It was slow, frustrating, but Sansa saw the wisdom in it. Every lord who felt heard, every grievance that found a voice, wove another fragile thread in the new order. At last, a ship arrived from Essos. Martin Lannister disembarked, a youth of 17. Clever and cautious, with more humility than any Lannister Sansa had ever known. He stood before the council, recited the names of his dead kin, and asked only for the right to rebuild, not to rule. Sansa watched as Daenerys granted his request, offering not just land, but a seat at the council. The ghosts of the past were not exorcised, but their grip loosened. A new generation would decide what Westeros became. The council's work was not finished, nor would it ever be. But when Sansa rode north again, the mood in King's Landing was changed. She saw it in the faces of the small folk, the laughter of children, the bustle of honest trade. Even the bells rang brighter. On her last day in the city, Sansa walked the ruins of the old sept, the spring air scented with lilacs. Tyrion found her there. "You did more than kill Cersei, you know," he said, his voice gentle. "You killed the idea that power must always be cruel." Sansa shook her head. "I only did what I had to." "As did we all," Tyrion replied. "But some of us learned to do better." They parted as friends, and Sansa rode north through meadows blooming with wildflowers, the world new minted by the sun. At Winterfell, Lyanna ran to greet her, eyes shining with pride. Sansa knelt, gathering her daughter in her arms. "What did you learn, Mama?" Lyanna asked. Sansa smiled, her heart full. "That peace is a garden. It needs watching every day. And that even wolves must sometimes make peace with lions." The seasons turned, the snows came and went, and the north endured. Sansa ruled long and well, her line strong, her people loyal. In the fullness of time, when Lyanna was grown and ready, Sansa laid down her crown and became at last only herself, a Stark of Winterfell, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had changed the world, not with swords or dragons, but with courage, patience, and the wisdom to know that the greatest victories are sometimes the ones no bard will ever sing. And in the quiet heart of the Godswood, beneath the weirwood's watchful eyes, she whispered her thanks, not for what she had gained, but for what she had been spared. The endless bitterness of vengeance, the ruin of pride, the cold emptiness of power unshared. The wolf had not only survived the storm, she had shaped the dawn that followed. Years passed, and peace became its own legend. Fragile as spun glass, Sansa grew into a wise ruler, beloved and respected, not only in the north, but throughout the patchwork of kingdoms that Westeros had become. Letters came to Winterfell from the Riverlands, from the Vale, from distant Dorne. Some were requests for counsel or mediation, others news of births, marriages, deaths, disputes. Sansa read each one in her solar, her fingers ink-stained and sure. She was often tired, but there was a deep satisfaction in knowing her words mattered beyond her borders. Lyanna grew as the years unfolded, strong-willed and fiercely clever. She rode through the snows on her own direwolf, a rare white beast named Mist, who had come from the forests north of the Wall and chosen her, as if the old gods themselves had sent him. The small folk adored Lyanna, with her ready laughter and sharp tongue. She trained with the guards and the maester alike, equally at home with sword or scroll, and the people of Winterfell began to murmur that when the time came, the North would follow her as they had followed her mother. Sansa let Lyanna roam, teaching her to rule not by fear but by fairness, to listen first and command later, to never turn away from the suffering of her people or the truth of her heart. They walked together often, through the snow and the spring grass, sometimes silent, sometimes trading stories. Sansa's hair was threaded with silver now, but her back was straight, her eyes clear as winter sky. Jon came north every year as the snows began to fall, his visits less frequent but always heartfelt. He was older too, marked by years of service in King's Landing, and the endless patient labor of holding the realm together. Daenerys was still queen, her dragons gone to the mists of legend, but her vision of a council-led realm had taken root. Jon had no heirs, but the people spoke of him as the glue that had bound the kingdoms, the voice that even the proudest southern lord heeded. When he rode through the gates of Winterfell, Sansa and Lyanna would greet him at the Godswood, their laughter echoing between the ancient trees. Jon's eyes always found the weirwood's face, and Sansa suspected he prayed for the dead, for those who had not lived to see this world. She prayed with him, and when they rose, there was always a shared sorrow that neither could put to words. On the 20th anniversary of Cersei's death, the kingdoms agreed to host a grand council at Winterfell, a gathering of all the lords and ladies, all the rulers and counselors, to mark the years of peace and to discuss the future. The invitations went out in the hand of Sansa's own daughter, Lyanna, her script elegant and firm. They arrived in the thaw of spring. Margaery Tyrell, now Lady Paramount of the Reach, came with her grown sons, golden-haired and quick-witted. Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, brought his daughter Maris, a skilled archer with the storm in her blood. Yara Greyjoy rode up the King's Road with her niece by her side. Even Dorne sent its young prince, tawny-skinned and courteous, bearing a gift of firewine and oranges. The castle filled with voices and the bustle of servants, the air rich with the scents of spices and roasting meats. Old banners, newly sewn, hung beside the direwolf. The halls were alive with the colors of every house. Sun and spear, rose and lion, kraken and trout. Sansa presided with poise, flanked by Lyanna and Jon. She saw how her daughter watched the lords and ladies, how she measured each face and weighed every word. Sansa remembered her own first council, so many years ago in the Red Keep, and hoped she had spared Lyanna some of the pain and fear she had known then. The council met in the great hall, sunlight streaming through the high windows, the murmur of conversations subdued but steady. They spoke of crops and trade, of bandits and border disputes, of the new world they had made, and the dangers that might yet undo it. Sansa listened to every voice, offering guidance where she could, letting the young lords and ladies argue and compromise. She saw Maris Baratheon and Lyanna spar in debate, quick and sharp, their laughter chasing the old shadows from the room. Yet even in this peace, Sansa felt the old currents of rivalry and ambition. A petty quarrel over land between the Tullys and the Freys threatened to become a feud. The young Dornish prince eyed the Reach with thinly veiled hunger. Margaery, always charming, pressed her own interests with a velvet glove. On the second day, a messenger arrived in secret, seeking Sansa's ear alone. He brought news from the west. A gold company, once loyal to Casterly Rock, had begun gathering men, raiding villages along the coast, talking of a new king, a pretender who claimed to be a Lannister, son of Cersei. Sansa felt a chill settle in her bones. After all these years, Cersei's shadow still lingered. She gathered Jon and Lyanna in her solar that night. The candlelight flickered on the carved faces of the Starks in the tapestries. "We cannot let this threat grow," Jon said, voice low. "If another Lannister rises, even a false one, old wounds may reopen. The realm will fracture." Lyanna looked troubled. "Why do the small folk follow him, after all that happened?" Sansa answered, "Because peace is never certain. Some long for old glories. Others want someone to blame for their hardship. We must be wise, meet the threat before it grows, but not with swords if it can be helped." Jon nodded. A show of unity then, not just from the north, but from every kingdom. Then done? So the council became a war council, but not one of rage and panic. Sansa stood before the assembly, Lyanna at her side, and told them of the threat. She did not try to hide it or soften it with false hope. "We have all lost to war. We have all bled for this peace. I will not throw it away for pride or vengeance. If there is to be another king in the West, let him come and make his claim openly. Let him face the council, answer for his words, and show himself before the realm he would rule. If he has truth on his side, let us hear it. If not, let him fade, nameless and unmourned." Then, Margaery spoke next, offering her support and promising the harvests of the Reach to feed the West through the coming year. Gendry promised ships and swords if needed. Even the Dornish prince, sly and cautious, agreed to send messengers to the ports, cutting off any hope of alliance from across the narrow sea. It was decided a delegation would ride to Lannisport, led by Lyanna and Maris, carrying the banners of every kingdom and the words of peace. Sansa watched her daughter prepare for the journey, pride warring with fear in her heart. Jon trained her in sword and shield, and Sansa herself gave counsel on the arts of listening, persuasion, and reading the truth behind words. Lyanna rode west with 100 sworn swords, banners streaming. Maris Baratheon rode at her side, quick to laughter and fierce in defense. The journey was tense, villages emptied by fear, the air thick with suspicion. When they reached Lannisport, they found the Gold Company camped outside the city, the would-be king holding court in a commandeered hall. He was young, handsome in a Lannister way, with golden hair and green eyes. He spoke softly, promising wealth and protection, justice for old grievances, a return to the days when Lannister gold flowed across the land. But Lyanna heard the emptiness behind his words, saw how he flinched at the smallest sign of opposition. She challenged him to speak before the people, to show proof of his birth and right. He could not. The small folk, given a choice, turned away. The Gold Company melted into the hills, the threat gone as quickly as it had come. Lyanna sent word to Sansa, "All is well. We ride for home." When the banners of Winterfell reappeared on the horizon, Sansa stood atop the battlements, her heart light for the first time in months. Lyanna and Maris rode in at the head, their swords clean, their faces bright with victory. The people of Winterfell cheered, and Sansa felt the old fear fall away. That night, as the feast roared in the hall, Jon found Sansa standing in the godswood. The moon hung full and bright, lighting the faces carved in the weirwood. "You did it," Jon said, voice rough with pride. "You made a world where swords aren't always the answer." Sansa looked up at the moon, her breath misting. "We did it, Jon. All of us. And we'll have to keep doing it again and again." Jon smiled. "A rare thing. There's no one I'd rather have at my side." They stood together in silence, the snow soft beneath their boots, the future stretching out like the King's Road beneath a spring sky. In the years that followed, Sansa watched Lyanna grow into her role, guiding the North with wisdom and wit. The other kingdoms followed her example, their own rulers taking counsel, not command. The peace held, sometimes battered, sometimes fragile, but it held. When Sansa was old and gray, she passed the rule of Winterfell to Lyanna. The people gathered in the godswood, the air scented with pine and the promise of another spring. Sansa laid her hands on her daughter's shoulders, her voice steady and strong. "Remember, Lyanna, power is not a birthright, but a responsibility. The North endures because we endure for each other." Lyanna nodded, her eyes shining. "I will, Mother. I swear it." The pact was strong, the line unbroken. As Sansa slipped from the world, she did so knowing she had shaped something greater than vengeance or pride. A legacy of peace, of listening, of strength tempered by mercy. And in the silent heart of the godswood, as the wind stirred the crimson leaves, the old gods bore witness. The girl who had once been a little bird was now the spirit of the North, and the world she left behind was better for her having lived. Oh, Kanji. The first snow of the season arrived with little warning, sweeping over the moors and blanketing the roofs and fields of Winterfell. The city was quiet beneath the snowfall, but inside the castle there was warmth. A hearth fire roaring in the great hall, the smell of bread baking in the kitchens, and the laughter of children echoing from the yard where Lyanna Stark's own son, Deddard, named for Sansa's father, played with the pups from Mist's most recent litter. Sansa watched from a window above, the years showing in the silver of her hair and the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, but her posture still regal, her gaze sharp as the first frost. It was a time of contentment, a time Sansa would never have dared to dream of when she was a frightened girl in King's Landing. When every day had been a test of wit and survival, there was nothing left of the old Red Keep in her world now, save for the lessons she'd learned and passed on to her daughter, and now to her grandson, who ran as freely as any wolf in the woods. The hall was full each evening with bannermen and their wives, with harvesters and builders, with travelers from the south who brought rare spices and bright cloth to trade in Winterfell's growing market square. The North thrived, and it was Sansa's doing, her legacy written in every smiling face, every child who ran unafraid. Still, peace had a price, and Sansa, now older and slower, remembered it each time she visited the crypts. She walked there often, alone, her steps echoing in the cold stone passage beneath the castle. She laid her hand on the statues of her mother and father, on Robb and Rickon, and even on Bran's, for though the boy who had returned from beyond the wall was never truly gone, his body had at last found rest in Winterfell, his spirit roving far beyond mortal reach. She spoke to them sometimes quietly, not as a queen but as a daughter and a sister, telling them of the harvest, of Lyanna's son, of the choices she still had to make. The world beyond the North was still troubled, if less so than in the bloody years of her youth. Daenerys Targaryen had ruled until her death, peaceful at last in her bed, mourned across kingdoms. Jon had outlived her by only 2 years, dying quietly in the south, and sent home in a black-draped carriage with an escort of loyal men. His body rested now in the Winterfell crypts beside Ned and Lyanna, the Starks together in the silence beneath the earth. The Council of Lords and Ladies that Daenerys and Jon had helped build endured. It was never perfect, but it was better than what came before. The kingdoms were truly independent now. Sometimes quarrelsome, sometimes generous, often unpredictable. Dorne traded in luxury. The Reach sent crops and wine north every autumn, and Storm's End had become a hub for shipbuilding and trade. The Westerlands, under Martin Lannister, never claimed a crown again, content to rebuild and grow rich from honest labor, rather than plunder. Letters came now and then from across the narrow sea, from Arya, who had gone west and never settled in one place for long, but always sent news and tokens. Strange stones, feathers, tales of places even old Nan had never dreamed. Sansa read them aloud to the children, letting the old stories and the new mingle by firelight. Lyanna's rule was steady, if not without its challenges. The North, for all its strength, was a land of proud and stubborn lords. And there were disputes over land, over game, over the rights to certain rivers and the forests near the wall. Lyanna listened well, never favoring one house too openly, keeping the peace with her mother's patience and her father's quiet strength. Her husband, Harwin Manderley, was clever and loyal, managing the stores and the defenses as the Starks had always done. One bitter winter, a sickness swept through the north. The Maesters called it the Pale Fever. The young and the old died quickly, and even those in the prime of life were not spared. Lyanna fell ill but survived, though the fever took one of her twin daughters, a loss that darkened the halls for many seasons. Sansa moved quietly through Winterfell, comforting the grieving, helping to tend the sick. She did not flinch from suffering or death, knowing them as old companions, and because she did not, neither did her people. It was in the spring that a raven arrived bearing the seal of Dorne, a sun and spear impressed in dark wax. The message was from Prince Tristan, who now ruled Sunspear. There had been border raids from the east, from Essos, sellswords landing in the Red Mountains, taking small villages and retreating before any force could meet them. The council was called once more, and Sansa made the journey south, this time as elder advisor to the north, leaving the rule in Lyanna's hands. The journey was long. The land she passed changed in ways both subtle and obvious. The south was richer, greener than she remembered. But there were new towns, new crops, old villages rebuilt and thriving. At King's Landing, the ruins of the Sept had been cleared, a vast garden planted in its stead, where any faith might gather to pray beneath the open sky. The Dragon Pit was a council chamber now, its stones covered in ivy, the echo of dragons replaced by the quiet murmur of debate. Sansa was greeted as an honored guest, not as a rival or a queen. She found Tyrion there, older than she, his wit unblunted, and they shared a glass of strong wine on a terrace overlooking Blackwater Bay. "You've made the world kinder," Tyrion said, not without irony, or at least taught it that women's voices matter as much as swords. Sansa smiled. "I hope it remembers. The world forgets sometimes." He laughed, soft and genuine. "Not this time. Not while the north stands and the rose keeps its thorns." The council debated the Dornish raids for weeks, but Sansa counseled patience. She convinced the lords to send not an army but envoys, gold for peace and the promise of mutual defense. In the end, most of the sellswords accepted, turning mercenary ambition to guarding the ports they once raided. It was a small victory, but it reminded Sansa that some battles were still best won with words. As the years unspooled, Sansa withdrew more and more from public life. She spent her days walking the woods, telling stories to her grandchildren, working with her hands in the small kitchen garden she kept near the Godswood. The faces on the weirwoods watched her as she aged, their red eyes ever sorrowful, ever wise. When at last her body failed, it was winter again, and the castle was full of her family. Lyanna, now truly the Lady of Winterfell, sat with her for hours each day, recounting the work of ruling, seeking advice on stubborn bannermen or recalcitrant merchants. Sansa gave what counsel she could, but mostly she listened, watching the flame of her family burn bright through the darkness. On her final evening, Sansa asked to be taken to the Godswood. There, beneath the ancient heart tree, Her kin gathered. Lyanna and Harwin, their children and grandchildren, even a few great-grandchildren, red-cheeked and solemn, not fully understanding what it meant to witness an ending. Sansa touched the face of the tree, feeling the rough bark and the old magic. She spoke quietly, not of thrones or battles or the burdens of rule, but of love. Her father's stern lessons, her mother's songs, the way Arya had run wild through the halls, the way Jon had smiled when he first saw snow after returning south. She spoke of the North, of the cold and the light, and the promise that the pack endures. When the wind picked up, rustling the red leaves overhead, she closed her eyes and smiled. She passed as she had lived, unafraid, steadfast, and loved. They buried her in the crypts beside her kin, a new statue carved in her likeness, wolf and direwolf pup at her feet, a book in one hand, her other resting gently on the hilt of a sword she had never needed to draw. The people of the North mourned, but they celebrated too, the woman who had saved them from war, who had taught them to endure and to hope. Lyanna ruled long and well, as did her children after her, and Winterfell never again fell to flame or sword. In song and story, Sansa's name endured, a queen who had worn no crown but whose wisdom had saved kingdoms, a wolf who had sung the songs of spring even as winter howled at her gates. And far beyond, wherever the winds carried the last of the Stark line, the story was told that peace is not the absence of fear or grief, but the courage to choose kindness, even when the world is cruel, that every hard-won dawn is paid for by the memory of night, that in the end, the pack endures. Years after Sansa Stark's death, the North moved through the cycle of seasons with the memory of her rule echoing like a gentle refrain, woven into the life of every village and hall, from the Dreadfort to Deepwood Motte. The wolf banners still flew above Winterfell's ramparts, and the words of House Stark were spoken by children at play and elders at the fireside. The stories of Sansa's wisdom, her patient judgments, her unwillingness to spill blood when words could mend, the way she stitched peace between great houses, grew richer with each telling. Lyanna Stark ruled in her mother's stead with an iron calm and a fierce heart. She was as formidable as any Stark before her, but her reign was marked by a rare gift for turning rivals into allies, and for hearing the true meaning behind even the most cunning words. The North remained strong, its people fiercely loyal to her and her line, but it was also more open to the world beyond its snows than it had been in generations. Southern merchants and travelers came by the White Knife, bringing trade and stories. Ravens crossed the sky in all seasons, their messages binding the kingdoms together in a fabric as delicate as it was resilient. The Council of the Realms, once held in tension by Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, had grown into a true parliament. Each kingdom sent its envoys, and the North's voice was respected. The Reach and the Riverlands often quarreled. The Stormlands kept to their own customs, and Dorne remained as secretive as ever. But under Lyanna's influence, the North became the realm's quiet anchor, the place other kingdoms looked to for steadiness and sense when tempers frayed. Lyanna's eldest son, Eddard, was now nearly grown. He bore the dark hair of his manderly father and his mother's keen gray eyes. Sansa's wisdom and the old stories of loss and perseverance were never far from his mind. He spent long hours in the crypts, reading the names on the tombs and listening to tales from the oldest servants. His sisters, Alice and Winifred, were clever and wild, often vanishing into the woods for days with Mist's daughters at their heels, learning the land and its people in ways their mother encouraged. One spring, news arrived that would test everything the Starks had built. A ship appeared at White Harbor flying the broken wheel of Braavos, a sigil both a warning and an invitation. Its captain brought word of unrest across the narrow sea. New wars in the free cities, whispers of slavers growing bold in the islands, and a strange alliance of exiled lords who claimed distant kinship with the Targaryens. Rumor also brought a more personal message. A woman, gray-haired and hard-eyed, calling herself Arya of House Stark, was said to have been seen among the sellswords and rebels. She fought with a Valyrian dagger and spoke of the North not as legend but as home. No one in the north believed it at first. Arya had become a myth, a half-wild thing whose letters sometimes arrived from places no maester's map could find. But Eddard believed. His mother, Lyanna, believed. They remembered the quiet strength of the aunt who had always returned, no matter how far she wandered. Lyanna called her council. Winterfell's great hall filled with bannermen and maesters, the heads of loyal houses, old allies and young upstarts eager to prove themselves. The air was thick with the scent of pine and candle smoke. "She is my aunt," Eddard said before them all, his voice unsteady with excitement and dread. "If she lives, we cannot let her face this danger alone." "We owe it to her," Lyanna agreed. "But the North cannot march without cause, and I will not send our swords chasing after a rumor. The world is less simple than it was in my mother's day." They debated long, weighing duty against caution, fear against the bonds of blood. In the end, it was Ollys, wild-eyed and reckless, who broke the stalemate. "We are Starks. If our kin calls, we answer. Mother, let me go with Ned. Send a banner. Let them see the wolf sails and brave us. Let the world remember we keep our word." So, it was decided. Eddard and Alis sailed from White Harbor in spring, their ships swift and armed, carrying the banners of Stark and Manderley. They crossed to Braavos and found the city restless. The canals were crowded, the alleys watched, the merchant princes wary of anything that might disrupt their careful balance of profit and power. Arya was there, just as the rumors said. They found her in a low house by the Green Canal, sword at her hip, laughter in her eyes as sharp as any blade. She embraced her kin, holding them tight, then stepped back to study the faces of the children she'd never met, but somehow recognized. She was older, yes, and carried scars inside and out. But her presence was like a knife in water. Clean, cold, impossible to ignore. She told them the truth of the dangers that crept through the free cities. Slavers emboldened, old Targaryen loyalists stirring, an alliance forming that threatened not just Essos, but the fragile peace across the narrow sea. Arya did not ask the North for armies, only for witnesses. "Let the world see that the wolves are watching," she said. "They'll think twice before crossing the pact." Eddard and Ali stayed with Arya for a time, learning the city and its dangers. Together, they exposed a slaver's plot, unmasked an assassin sent to kill a merchant prince, and, on a night of mist and thunder, stood beside Arya as she faced an old enemy and sent him running into the darkness. Their presence had its intended effect. The leaders of Braavos, wary of offending the North and its queen, brokered peace between rival factions and sent envoys west to reassure the council in King's Landing that Braavos remained neutral. The slavers faded, the Targaryen pretenders scattered, and Arya remained in the city as the North's quiet watcher, a legend made real. When Eddard and Alis returned to Winterfell, they brought Arya's greetings and her warnings. Lyanna listened well, strengthening the North's ties to the free cities and opening trade that made her people wealthier and her coffers deeper. She sent envoys south, reminding the council that the North's banners would rise not for gold or glory, but for family and the fragile peace all had bled to keep. The years rolled on. Lyanna grew older, her hair streaked with gray, but her grip on the North only strengthened. Eddard, now Lord Stark, ruled with his mother's wisdom and his great-aunt's cunning. Ace took a seat at the council in King's Landing, her wildness tempered by hard-won experience, while Winifred roamed the North as Warden of the Woods, a protector of small folk and beasts alike. Each spring, Arya's letters arrived, full of news from distant shores and sly encouragement. Sometimes she returned herself, slipping through the gates at night, never staying long but always bringing stories for the young Starks at her feet. Peace endured, not perfect, never untroubled, but lasting, a garden tended by hands wise and strong. The story of Sansa's courage, her choice to kill a queen for the sake of many, was told beside the fire as the snows fell. It was not a tale of vengeance, but of duty and hope. A reminder that sometimes the bravest path was not to conquer, but to endure and shape the world with gentleness where others would use only steel. And so the line of Stark continued, the pack always watching, always together, no matter how far the winds might scatter them. The North, shaped by a queen's wisdom and a family's love, stood proud beneath the snow, eternal as the old gods, and as new as the green shoots that pushed through the last drifts of every winter. When winter's last snows finally yielded to the gentle warmth of spring, Winterfell's courtyards teemed with life. Calves stumbled after their mothers in the pastures beyond the walls. Small folk set about their tasks with song, grateful for another season of peace and full harvests. Children ran laughing along the walkways above the bailey, wooden swords clacking, banners flapping in the wind. And through it all, the great dire wolves of House Stark roamed, their numbers replenished over generations, respected by all who dwelled within the keep and feared by any who harbored ill will. Eddard Stark, now Lord of Winterfell, ruled beside his mother Lyanna, whose wisdom had deepened even as her hair whitened and her gait slowed. He carried his grandmother Sansa's bearing, measured, watchful, steadfast. Yet when he walked among the people, there was warmth and ease. His siblings and cousins had grown into their own. Alice, diplomat and counselor, a force of nature in the council halls of King's Landing. Winifred, riding the wild lands from the rills to the last hearth, beloved by the clans and free folk alike. Young Robert and Sansa, the next generation, eager and unafraid, learning from the stories and living by example. Learning from the stories and living by example. There was work to be done, of course, always. Though the North was at peace, it was not untouched by the world's tempests. Letters from the South spoke of new coin minted in Old Town, of the Reach and Dorne competing over trade routes, of the Riverlands mending from floods and skirmishes. But the worst of the old cruelties had faded. In the place of war and want, alliances formed through marriages and treaties, through promises that were, for a generation at least, mostly kept. It was in this time of cautious plenty that an unexpected visitor arrived at Winterfell, shaking the house like the north wind that swept across the moors. A slender woman, veiled and cloaked, rode through the gate with only a single guard. Eddard watched from the ramparts, sensing something of the old stories in her bearing. The wolf and shadow both. She dismounted and threw back her hood, and the assembled small folk fell to whispers. Arya Stark had come home. She was older than legend made her, hair iron gray and eyes sharp as the day she'd first set out across the world. Yet her stride was that of a swordswoman, and when she smiled at the guardsmen who'd traveled all the way from Bravos, she was as fierce and quick as any youth. Arya hugged Eddard with a rib-cracking force, then knelt before Lyanna, who lifted her up laughing. They held a feast that night. All of Winterfell crammed into the great hall, the fires blazing, music rising to the rafters. Arya sat at the head table between Lyanna and Eddard, flanked by a host of grandchildren and great-nieces and nephews who peppered her with questions about the Summer Sea, about the ruins of Valyria, about Bravos and the free cities. She told them stories, some true, some woven from fancy, of sword fights atop storm-lashed decks, of feasts in strange lands, of monsters slain and treasures lost. She never mentioned the deaths, the loneliness, the sharp edges of wandering, but Eddard saw in her eyes the weight of what she carried. When the meal ended and the youngest children were tucked away, Arya and Lyanna walked the Godswood, the old trees heavy with new leaves, and the air scented with pine and thawed earth. Arya pressed her palm to the weirwood's face and breathed deep. Home, she said, and Lyanna squeezed her hand. I never thought I'd see you again, Lyanna admitted, her voice raw. We grew up in the shadow of your absence. Even Mother, she always hoped you'd come back, even when she knew you wouldn't stay. Arya looked at her, fierce and fond. I'm a Stark. Even wolves who wander come home in the end. As the moon rose, Arya spoke quietly of her real purpose. Trouble brewed in the east, whispers of a slaver fleet gathering on the Jade Sea, of new sellswords hiring out to whoever paid most, of restless plots in Pentos and Lys. She had come not to call Winterfell to war, but to warn them, to ask that the North remain vigilant. Peace, she reminded Lyanna, was a garden always in need of tending. Lyanna listened, remembering her mother's words. "We are not the North of old," she said. "We have friends now, and kin in every corner of the world. But the world is never done testing us." They agreed. Arya would remain for a season, teaching the younger Starks, sharing her knowledge of poisons and secrets, helping the household maester update his maps and archives with the truth of distant lands. Eddard watched his children train at dawn with Arya, Robert learning to fight left-handed, Sansa learning the Braavosi tongue. The old blood ran strong. One morning, Arya and Alice rode together down the King's Road, talking in low voices of the council in King's Landing. Alice spoke of the Reach and the Iron Islands, of new alliances and the ever-present risk of old grudges rising again. Arya listened, then gave her counsel in a few sharp words. "Trust, but never blindly. Remember the North. Use your name, but do not let it be your only shield." A letter arrived, urgent and sealed with the seven-pointed star of the faith. The High Septon had died, and some in the city saw it as an opportunity to press for a stronger hand, to revisit the old questions of the North's independence. Aedes was needed in the city, and Arya agreed to accompany her as far as White Harbor. The North's presence, she said, would remind the realm that peace was not won by threats, but by the memory of loss. Before they departed, Lyanna gathered her family in the Godswood. There, beneath the rustling red leaves, she spoke not as a queen but as a mother, grandmother, and the last of her line to remember Sansa's quiet lessons. "There will always be those who believe they can bend the North," Lyanna said, her voice as clear as the first stream after thaw. "They will come with words or armies or gold, but we endure because we listen to each other, because we remember what it costs to lose, and because we are not afraid to love or to forgive. That is Sansa's gift. That is what endures." She pressed a hand to Arya's shoulder, and the wandering wolf smiled. Arya's time at Winterfell passed swiftly, but her presence lingered. The children she taught would grow into lords and ladies, soldiers and spymasters, bearing her lessons and her secrets into the world beyond. When she finally departed, it was on a gray morning, the mist thick on the moors. Eddard, Alice, and the household gathered to see her off. Arya left as she had come, alone with little more than Needle at her hip and the Stark banner on her pack. Seasons turned. The peace Sansa had sown held, not unchallenged, but rooted deep. Aelys negotiated for the North in King's Landing, her reputation growing with every year. Winifred married into House Umber, strengthening the ties between castle and clan. Robert, restless, joined a ship bound for Old Town, eager to see the world and carry the Stark name into new lands. Letters from Arya arrived sporadically, always in different hands, always with a message: the pack endures. When Lyanna's time came, her passing was quiet. A falling leaf in autumn, a hush before the snows. Eddard knelt beside her as she faded, promising to remember the lessons she'd cherished, to pass them on to his children, to keep the pack whole. Winterfell's bells rang out, and the people mourned, but also celebrated a life spent in service. Eddard's first act as Lord was to lead the family to the crypts. There, among the stone faces of Sansa, Jon, Arya, and so many others, he spoke simply: "This is our legacy, not crowns or battles, but the promise that none of us stands alone. We are Starks, and we endure." With each generation, the memory of Sansa and her choices grew richer, not faded. In the heart of the Godswood, beneath the weirwood's ancient boughs, the voices of the past and future mingled. A song of wolves, of winter and spring, of loss and renewal. And all across the North and beyond, the world remembered the lesson learned long ago by a girl who had once been a little bird and had grown into the voice, the hope, and the heart of her people.